Imagine the scene. You are lying in a sterile hospital bed, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the heavy weight of uncertainty. She is there, her fingers interlaced with yours, her eyes shimmering with a devotion that feels infinite. She whispers promises that sound like holy scripture, swearing that no tragedy, no loss, and no catastrophe could ever pull her from your side. In that moment, her words are your only lifeline. They are the anchors you drop into a churning sea, the one truth you allow yourself to believe in a world that is suddenly falling apart. Yet deep within the silent chambers of your soul, a cold, quiet voice begins to murmur a question you are terrified to answer. What happens to this devotion when the man she loves, the man with status, strength, and utility, is erased? What is left of her loyalty when you are reduced to nothing but a shadow of your former self? You have seen the ghosts of other men who ignored this question. You remember the friend whose long-term partner vanished weeks after his company folded. You think of the brother who was abandoned the moment his mental health began to crumble under the weight of the world. You recall the colleague whose wife found a replacement while he was still undergoing the brutal cycles of chemotherapy. This is a truth revealed by history itself, which provided a laboratory so cruel and so absolute that it stripped away every romantic delusion humanity has ever fostered. We are looking into the frozen heart of the Soviet Gulag, a landscape of ice and suffering where every social contract was shredded and every comfortable lie about love was exposed for what it truly was. The Gulag was not merely a prison for the body. Across thousands of camps scattered like open wounds across the Siberian wasteland, millions of men were stripped of their names, their wealth, their dignity, and their power. This was an accidental revelation of human nature. When you remove a man's ability to provide, protect, and project status, you create the perfect conditions to observe what remains of the eternal promises made in the warmth of a living room. In this darkness, men discovered a truth that the comfortable and the sheltered will never have to face. They learned what becomes of love when the lover has nothing left to offer. They witnessed the exact moment a promise dissolves when keeping it offers no return. The camp stripped away the decorative layers of civilization, leaving only the raw, clicking machinery of survival underneath. No romantic fantasy could survive a temperature of -60 degrees. No poem about unconditional devotion could withstand the brutal arithmetic of a Siberian winter. What emerged was data, terrible, consistent, and undeniable data. While the physical cold claimed fingers and toes, a different kind of cold killed the heart. The realization that the woman who swore eternal loyalty had already begun a new life with someone else. This realization did not just break the man, it killed the part of him that believed in permanent human bonds. Among the survivors, Alexander Solzhenitsyn stood as the chronicler of this collective heartbreak. He did not just survive the system, he analyzed its patterns with surgical precision. He observed a phenomenon so universal that it could not be dismissed as a series of isolated tragedies. It was a law of nature. When the state arrested a man, his woman faced a terrifying choice. In overwhelming numbers, the script followed a predictable rhythm. First, the correspondence would begin to wither. The letters that once arrived daily became weekly, then monthly, then ceased entirely. The packages of food and clothing, the literal difference between life and death in the camps, would dwindle until the prisoner was left to starve in silence. But the cruelty was not in the silence, it was in the replacement. While these men were freezing in cells, their wives and fiancés were not just moving on. They were being reabsorbed into the arms of other men. The speed of this transition was the most horrifying revelation of all. Solzhenitsyn documented cases where decorated heroes returned to find their wives pregnant by men who had never seen a day of combat. He saw devoted husbands receive divorce papers in the same stack of mail as their prison sentences. These were not dramatic betrayals fueled by malice. They were bureaucratic, efficient, and practical. It was as if the woman's previous devotion had been a seasonal garment, discarded the moment the weather turned. What the Gulag revealed with terrifying clarity is that love functions like a currency in an economy that most men are too blinded by romance to see. Female loyalty is not a static, unconditional gift. It is a conditional investment tied to what a man represents, what he provides, and what he can potentially offer. This is not a conscious calculation made by evil individuals. It is something far deeper, etched into the very architecture of the feminine psyche. When a man's value collapses, when his status is revoked and his resources are seized, an ancient biological alarm system activates within the woman. The love that seemed as solid as granite begins to evaporate like mist. The loyalty that appeared unshakable cracks under the pressure of new, harsh realities. Staying loyal to a prisoner meant choosing social exile, economic ruin, and physical hardship with no guarantee of a return on that investment. In that brutal equation, love became a luxury that most could not afford. The most disturbing part is that these women were not monsters. They were ordinary mothers, daughters, and sisters. Their behavior transcended education, class, and age. It was a fundamental response to a shift in survival data. Think back to your own life, the moments you lost a job, your health, or your confidence. Recall the subtle shift in her tone, the way the physical affection became a chore, the way her eyes began to look past you rather than at you. You told yourself it was stress or a temporary rough patch, but you were actually watching the ancient machinery of the mind adjusting to your decreased value. In this vast darkness, however, there were exceptions that blazed like dying stars. The Decemberist wives became legends not because their loyalty was the standard, but because it was so impossibly rare. These women defied every instinct, every social pressure, and every rational argument for self-preservation. They stood in prison lines for weeks, endured the loss of their own status, and trekked across thousands of miles of frozen tundra to be near men who might never touch them again. Their loyalty was not a passive state of being. It was active warfare against a system designed to sever all human connection. But their names are remembered precisely because they were statistical anomalies. They proved that such loyalty is possible, but in doing so, they cast a harsh light on how infrequently it actually occurs. These exceptional women were often driven by something beyond romantic love, an ideological or spiritual fire that made their identity inseparable from their partner. To abandon him was to commit suicide of the soul. For the majority, however, the abandonment was a product of evolutionary programming. This is not about moral failure. It is about a biological calculus that predates language itself. Throughout history, for a woman to remain attached to a weakened, resourceless male was a death sentence for her and her offspring. This programming does not care about modern wedding vows or the poetry of the 19th century. It cares about the continuity of life. When a man is broken, the female brain begins the process of detachment as a defensive maneuver. This explains why the abandonment often feels so sudden, so total, and so devoid of empathy. A switch is flipped. One day you are the center of her universe. The next you are a ghost she no longer recognizes. She will later rewrite the history of your relationship to justify this shift, convincing herself she never truly loved you to begin with, protecting her own psyche from the weight of her betrayal. For the men in the camps, learning of this betrayal was the ultimate test. It was a psychological crossroads. One path led to total collapse, the other to a terrifying new form of strength. Many men crumbled instantly. They had built their entire identity on being loved and needed. When that mirror was shattered, they saw nothing behind it. They died not from the cold, but from the realization that they were replaceable. But the survivors, the men who emerged with a different light in their eyes, underwent a process of forging. They took the white-hot pain of abandonment and hammered it into a shield. They did not become hateful, they became sovereign. They killed the part of themselves that required external validation. They realized that if their meaning was dependent on a woman's loyalty, they would always be a slave to circumstances they could not control. These men developed what was called the discipline of stone. They created their own structure in a world of chaos. They exercised when they were starving. They studied when they were exhausted. They maintained a mission that no state or woman could touch. They learned the most profound paradox of the masculine experience. You only become the kind of man who can inspire true loyalty once you no longer need it to survive. True strength is not the ability to keep a woman. It is the ability to be complete if she leaves. It is the realization that your mission must be your North Star. If your foundation is built on the shifting sands of romantic devotion, your house will inevitably fall. But if your foundation is your own internal purpose, you can navigate any storm. The survivors of the Gulag were men whose meaning transcended their personal lives. They lived for a craft, a truth, or a spiritual conviction. This mission was the only thing the guards couldn't take, and the only thing the silence of their wives couldn't break. Accepting this reality is not depressing. It is the ultimate liberation. When you stop expecting unconditional love from a conditional world, you stop being a victim. You stop trying to buy loyalty through self-sacrifice and start appreciating it as a temporary gift. You enjoy the warmth of the sun while it shines, but you do not panic when the clouds arrive, because you have learned to generate your own heat. You move from a state of desperate need to a state of calm appreciation. You become a mountain, solid, unmoving, and majestic. Others may climb your peaks and enjoy your view, but your existence does not depend on their presence. The dark truth of female loyalty is only dark if you are still clinging to the fairy tales of childhood. It is an invitation to build a life that is not a reaction to someone else's choices, but a manifestation of your own will. The men who suffered in Siberia paid the price for this wisdom so that we wouldn't have to. They showed us that while love is a beautiful decoration for a life, it is a catastrophic foundation. Build on the bedrock of your mission, rule yourself, and in that self-mastery, find the freedom that no betrayal can ever take away.